Hey everybody, before we get into the episode 2 recap, if you're looking for an episode 1 recap of The Witcher, just click the tab in the upper right hand corner. That'll take you to the most comprehensive recap you'll find on YouTube. Now, let's go into Season 2. Season 2 picks up right after the battle. Tissaia is trying to find out where Yennefer went, but she can't. Vilgefortz comes up and gives her an update, but all she's focused on is Yennefer. Vilgefortz has to tell her she's gone. And that's when Tissaia hears somebody yelling Yennefer's name, and it's Geralt, who's got Ciri on a horse. Tissaia walks up to him and says, "Who is Yennefer to you?" But he simply asks, "Is she alive?" And Tissaia doesn't answer the question, but her face says it all. She does tell Geralt, "We won because of her." And Geralt looks at Tissaia disgusted and says, "Was it worth it?" Then he walks away. Tissaia returns to Aretuza, where the mages who did survive are being patched up. Arturus comes up and asks if there's an update on Frangilla, and Vilgefortz tells him that Frangilla was one of the people that were leading the charge against them. But there is good news to come out of this battle. It's not just the fact that they won, but they also took a prisoner, and that prisoner is Kaer. But Kaer hasn't said much. In fact, he hasn't said anything at all. So Tissaia takes it upon herself to try to extract some information from him. And like most people who are about to get interrogated, he talks a tough game, but Tissaia is more powerful. She tells him, "I'm going to take your knowledge. I'm going to take your memories. I'm going to take your very being and leave you cold and helpless, trapped in eternal darkness of your own mind." And whatever she does looks extremely painful. So while Tissaia had returned to Aretuza, Geralt and Ciri needed a place to go. That first night, they hunker down in the woods and they make camp, and Ciri is having trouble sleeping. She has this recurring dream of a black knight who has her on his horse. Cintra is burning, and she's too helpless to stop any of it. She then asks Geralt about why he claimed the Law of Surprise, how she ended up in his custody, and he explains the whole scenario, but does let her know that her father had no idea what he was giving up. The next morning, they wake up, and they head to a place called Kaer Morhen, and it's where witchers go in the winter. It's basically their home. No one really knows about it, and that's the way they like it. While they're walking in the woods, they come across a dead animal, and Roach gets pretty freaked out. Geralt ends up calming him down, and Ciri asks, "How did you do that?" And he explains it's called Axii. It's a calming sign. He then goes to investigate the dead animal, but they start hearing screeching coming from the distance. He tells Ciri, "We should keep moving." And by nightfall, they come across a little village. But Geralt is shocked to find that there are no guards, and this is a village that always has someone around, but this time there's nobody. He tells Ciri that he knows somebody nearby. It's an old friend, so they head to his place. But when they get to his place, which is pretty large, windows start clattering, the gate behind them closes, and a half-man, half-boar ends up bursting out of the door and attacks Geralt. But it turns out this is actually Geralt's friend. Although the last time Geralt saw him, he wasn't a half-man, half-boar. He was just full-on man. So you can imagine Geralt's surprise to find that his friend has been turned into a boar. They do have a good laugh, though. His friend, Nivellen, ends up inviting both Ciri and Geralt in. He ends up drawing Ciri a bath so she can clean up. And then he and Geralt go off and get caught up on life. When Ciri ends up getting out of the bath, she sees that there's a beautiful dress waiting for her. She assumes that it was Nivellen, so she grabs it, comes out to the dining room, and thanks him for it. He then ends up using his magical powers to throw some food on the table. He tells Ciri how him and Geralt first met. It was when he was a boy, and his father was pretty tough. His father had hired Geralt to clear some woods of the monsters that were infesting it. He ended up finding Nivellen trying to do the same thing to get his father's approval, but instead of ratting him out to his dad, Geralt ended up giving him one of the monster's heads so he could go back to his dad and curry favor, and ended up working. They've been friends ever since. Geralt, though, has to address the elephant in the room. How his friend ended up becoming half-boar. He explains that he trashed the temple of the lion-headed spider, and after the damage was done, this priestess had cursed him to live like a boar forever, alone. Geralt then asks his friend what exactly happened in the town, and he explains that the entire village was deserted when the wild hunts riding over the horizon showed up. Geralt seems skeptical, but Nivellen tells them, "I saw him myself." Ciri starts hearing something in the ceiling and asks Nivellen, "Do you have a cat or something? I think it might be stuck in the ceiling." And Nivellen says, "I actually do. Don't worry, she's fine. Her name's Verena, and I'm very happy of her company because I'm all alone." Geralt wants to start looking around the property, but both Nivellen and Ciri convince him just to go to bed. Geralt ends up going outside to tend to Roach, but Roach ends up nudging him towards the gate. And when Geralt goes to investigate, he notices that there are clean footprints in the snow, which means they're not alone. But instead of going back in and asking Nivellen about it, he tries to get Nivellen to give him the truth another way. He says, let's play a drinking game. We'll throw knives at the painting of your father, and each time that we don't hit his head, somebody has to drink and tell the truth. Now, Geralt's a pretty good shot, but for whatever reason, he's missing pretty badly. His plan is backfiring. Instead of Nivellen telling him the truth, he's having to tell Nivellen how he ended up taking care of Ciri. Nivellen asks him, what changed you? You're different. And Geralt says, Yennefer, but unfortunately, she's dead. As they continue to drink and yuck it up, something isn't sitting right with Geralt. So he pulls out his own knife, throws it at the painting, and realizes that his friend has been cheating this entire time. And Nivellen owns up to it. Geralt asks him, what are you hiding? But instead of answering the question, Nivellen just says, I gotta get to bed. And that's what everybody in the house does, including Ciri. But Ciri is awoken when a girl ends up sneaking into her room. Although she doesn't go through the door, no, she ends up coming through the wall, climbing on the ceiling. I mean, this is not a normal girl. She ends up waking up Ciri and introducing herself as Verena. She tells Ciri that she was having a nightmare and she came to check on her. And Ciri's a little freaked out because this girl's movements aren't exactly natural. But Verena does ask her, do you like the dress that I left you? And that's when it clicks with Ciri that Verena was the one who left the dress. Ciri tells her, Nivellen said you were a cat, so what exactly are you? And then Verena telepathically speaks to Ciri and says, I am different. Verena then asks her, why do you travel with that man? I know what he is. He kills things. Ciri corrects her and says, monsters. She then asks her, are you a monster? But Verena says, are you a monster because you are different? That's when it dawns on Ciri that Nivellen had been hiding Verena from Geralt. And it's because Nivellen loves her. Verena then kisses Ciri's hand and tells her, this has got to be our secret until you leave. And Ciri ends up falling asleep. Now, while all of this was going on, Geralt wanted to go investigate the town a little bit more. He starts snooping around and he sees a bunch of dead bodies, and that's when he realizes what exactly his friend was hiding. It's a bruxa. He goes back to the castle, wakes up Ciri, and says, Roach is by the gate, and if anybody walks out of here that's not me, ride for your life. He then slowly walks by Nivellen's room and sees that the bruxa is feeding on him. When he bursts through the door, though, the bruxa ends up screaming at Geralt, and the sound wave literally throws him against the wall. Geralt is able to sense where the bruxa is and stabs it through the wall. The bruxa ends up falling on Geralt, and Geralt throws it through the window outside. And that's where Ciri is waiting on Roach and sees that Geralt is attacking Verena. Ciri ends up going over to Verena to check on her, and Verena tells Ciri he hurt me. But when Geralt makes his way outside, Verena ends up getting up and attacking him again. She ends up turning full bruxa and flying around the air until eventually Geralt is able to stab her. Ciri ends up going over to her body and trying to kind of cover her up. And that's when Verena pops up, grabs Ciri, and tells Geralt, back up or I'm going to attack her. But before Verena can even do that, Nivellen ends up coming out of the house and plunging a stake through her heart. You can tell this really upsets Nivellen. He didn't want to do this. But this action doesn't actually kill her. She ends up turning her head 180 degrees and ends up grabbing the stake and pulling her body towards Nivellen. She tells Nivellen, I loved you, and then goes to bite him, and that's when Geralt ends up cutting off her head. Nivellen screams in anguish. This is not exactly what he wanted. Now, even though Marina's head is cut off, she's still telepathically able to communicate to Ciri, and she tells Ciri, he'll come for you too. But with Verena dead, Nivellen is turned back into a human. The curse is lifted. He ends up explaining everything to Geralt, how he met Verena, and for the first time, he met somebody that didn't want to leave, that accepted him for being that way. He met somebody that didn't care that he raped the priestess in the temple. And both Geralt and Ciri kind of take a step back like, oh, wasn't expecting that. Okay, we're going to leave now. And they both take off. Now, this whole time, Geralt has thought that Yennefer is dead. She's not. She was actually taken prisoner by the Nilfgaardians, or the Nilfgaardians that are left. Really, she was taken prisoner by Frangilla. Frangilla continues to tell herself and anyone who will listen that the White Flame will be victorious, but Yennefer's not really buying it at this point. Yennefer realizes that Frangilla is planning on putting her up as a sacrifice for failing. She tries to tell her that what she should do is go back to the Brotherhood. But Frangilla tells her, the Brotherhood doesn't even want you back. You broke their sacred law. You tapped into fire magic. And Yennefer tells her it was at Tesea's behest. I'll be lauded for saving all of them. All of this isn't convincing Frangilla to switch sides or to let Yennefer out of her custody. But as they make their way back to Nilfgaard, their group is attacked. Everybody is killed except Frangilla and Yennefer. In episode 2, Yennefer and Frangilla are taken prisoner by elves, specifically the former elf king, Filavandrel. They're taken in the middle of the woods where they see a structure that looks a lot like a structure you would see in Aretuza. They're then escorted into a tent where they meet the new person in charge. It's an elven mage by the name of Francesca. But she's not too happy to see Yennefer and Frangilla. In fact, she's pissed off at Filavandrel for even bringing them. He figures they could be hostages, but she says, why don't you just kill them in the first place? I have no use for them. Yennefer speaks up, actually saying that she is part elf, and this isn't how you treat your own people. But Francesca takes offense to that because Yennefer doesn't have elven ears, and she doesn't buy the fact that Yennefer could possibly be elf. Francesca then instructs Filavandrel to hang them, and he points out, we've been digging here for weeks. Eventually, we're going to get caught. Francesca, however, reminds him that he no longer leads the elves. And then asks him, has the white robe visited your dreams too? And to that, the answer is no. But that comment by Francesca about the man in the white robe piques the interest of Yennefer. Because Yennefer has been visited by somebody in a red robe in her dreams. So when both Yennefer and Frangilla are taken outside and chained up to a tree, Yennefer asks Frangilla if she's had any nightmares regarding robed people. And Frangilla says, yeah, but the person in my dream is wearing a black robe. Yennefer points out that shared dreams are a powerful omen, which is something they could use to their advantage. Now they just need to get to Francesca. They also mention how they were told back in Aretuza that elven mages weren't a thing, but they chalk it up to another lie by Tesea. They figure, though, the easiest way to get to Francesca is through Filavandrel. And Filavandrel is busy in the moment, talking a few feet away to Francesca and a few other people in charge. Everyone's pretty concerned because they haven't had success in the woods, people are getting hungry, spirits are kind of running low. And Filavandrel says maybe the others in Temeria or Ardania are having better success. But Francesca shoots back that they're the same elves that lick the boots of humans, and they'll get their necks crushed by their boots. Filavandrel says, you promised us Dol Pathana. How long are we going to search? And Francesca tells all of them, we cannot lose faith. I know that these ruins will bear answers. The visions I've had since entering these woods are proof. She tells them that the white robe in her dreams has hidden her face, but she knows that it's the ancient prophet Ithilien. Filavandrel then gets up and walks out of the conversation, and at this point, he's within earshot of Yennefer and Frangilla. They start stroking his ego, asking, are you the Filavandrel from the Bard's songs? And he plays it off like it's no big deal, but he confirms, yeah, I am. They ask him, though, what happened? You were the Elf King. And he tells them that the elves had turned to Francesca after he failed to defeat Calanthe. Yennefer then tells them that they've also dreamt of robed figures, and if they're free, they could work together to figure out the meaning. But that's when you hear an elf in the background scream, we found something! A little while later, both Frangilla and Yennefer are scooped up and escorted into the ruins, and that's when they see what the elves found. It's an entryway. They're looking at all of these ancient hieroglyphics from the elves of the past. But at the end of it, they see Francesca. Francesca asks them about their dreams, and they tell her, this is a two-way street. You tell us about yours. And in Francesca's dream, there's dead bodies all over the place, but they're dead bodies of elves. It's Ithilien that grabs her and guides her to a new elven kingdom. Frangilla tells the group that the person in her dream is not Ithilien, it's Amir. He had just returned to Nilfgaard, he killed a usurper, and he saves her life. But when it comes time for Yennefer to tell about her visions, she doesn't. She walks up to the altar, moves some dust around, and it reveals that there's an elven language carved into the altar. She reads it aloud. Behold the mother of forests, the deathless mother nesting in dreams. There's also something on there about a hut with no doors. As they're trying to make sense of it all, the altar starts shaking. It moves backwards, and it reveals that there's a staircase leading down below. So all three women grab some torches and follow it. As they're walking down, both Yennefer and Frangilla kind of fall back. And Yennefer starts asking Frangilla about her dreams, because when Frangilla woke up, she seemed terrified. So she asks her if it's Amir who's supposed to protect her, why was she so scared? Frangilla explains that in the dream, she wakes up and there's a bunch of people surrounding her, touching her. She can't see them, and she also can't stop it. She goes on to explain that after the usurper executed Fergus, he had all the mages moved to a prison called the Playground. You can imagine what kind of prison this was. She was there for years until Amir found her and saved her. Their conversation, though, stops when they come across a hut in the middle of the woods with no doors. Francesca is convinced that this is what they've been looking for, but Yennefer warns her, if it's not, we're going to be in big trouble. The hut then rises and shines a light on all three of them, and they're knocked out. When they awake, they're all separated, but yet they're all in the hut, and they're all greeted by the person in the robe from their dream. For Francesca, it's Ithilien. Ithilien explains that the world is going to die in frost and then be reborn, but before that happens, the earth is going to flow with the blood of elves. Francesca asks, how do I stop it? And Ithilien tells her, remove the robe, and when she does that, she's like 6 months pregnant. Ithilien says this will be the first pure-blooded elf born in centuries, and this will be a new hope for a brighter future. Francesca, though, is a little skeptical. She's been pregnant in the past, but she's always had miscarriages. She then questions if the person in front of her is actually Ithilien, and this prophet scoffs at her, saying, your ancestors had more faith. Francesca then asks, okay, what do I have to do? And Ithilien tells her, to make your child live, you must first live amongst men in Cintra, which is Cintra. Now, Frangilla was met by Amir, but just like Francesca, Frangilla is a little skeptical on whether this is actually who she thinks it is. He doesn't take offense to it, though. He starts talking about putting her in charge. What would she do? And she said she would strengthen the forces, strengthening the numbers. And he says, even with doing all of that, you're going to need allies. And Frangilla knows that the only people that would ally themselves with Nilfgaard are elves. He whispers in her ear, if you're looking for salvation, you're bringing back the wrong elf. And then finally, with Yennefer, she's visited by a young girl. That's who was under the robe. The prophet starts insulting Yennefer pretty good, and Yennefer tries to play it off like she's not intimidated, but she clearly is. The prophet asks her, you're no longer bound, so why haven't you portaled yourself free? Before Yennefer can even answer, the prophet tells her, you felt it, haven't you? Or I should say, you haven't felt it. And it's true, Yennefer has felt off since she woke up in Frangilla's camp. She's then transported back to the lesson with the flower and the rock, and Yennefer cannot make the rock move, and she gets really upset. It's as if Yennefer has completely lost her magical abilities. All of a sudden, the girl starts morphing into all three, Ithilien, Amir, until finally it's settled on an older white woman. She tells Yennefer, I'm going to let you bake some more. I want your desperation crisp. You're going to beg me to take it from you, and I will. She ends up waking up in the middle of the forest, and at this point, the elves are making their way out of the forest, and this includes Frangilla. She tells her that Francesca has said the old guards want an alliance between the elves and Nilfgaard, and she agreed. And Yennefer scoffs at them, then you're both idiots. Frangilla asks Yennefer, what did you ask for? And Yennefer says, an end to all of this. They then say their goodbyes, and now that she's all alone, Yennefer runs through the forest, trying to conjure some magic, but she can't. And she screams in frustration. Now, over with Geralt and Ciri, they arrive at Kaer Morhen, and there's only about 20 Witchers left. They're all led by a guy named Vesemir, who saved most of them when they were kids and trained them all to be Witchers. He's a real father figure to them. They're all really excited to see Geralt. They haven't seen him in years, but they also are pretty surprised when they see Ciri standing right behind him. They all get caught up, though, cracking jokes, laughing, drinking, and that's when the last Witcher shows up, a guy named Eskel. Eskel looks like he has been through the ringer. He's holding a wooden claw, and he tells them that he was in battle for 6 hours, and it was with something called a leshy, which is something that they haven't seen in years. Eskel does explain, though, that while it looked like a leshy and sounded like a leshy, something was different about this one. He, however, is in pain. He got stung by it. His ego gets stung, however, when Vesemir says, to kill a leshy, you have to plunge a flame through its heart. In 6 hours, you didn't think about that? And everyone starts laughing at Eskel's expense, including Ciri. And Eskel doesn't mind when his friends are laughing at him, but he doesn't know who the hell Ciri is. So he walks up and says, who the hell are you? And Ciri, who is a little intimidated, says, Princess Cirilla of Cintra. Everybody kind of gets settled in. Geralt does a little bit of training, but then goes in for some research on that claw. Ciri is with him and is asking, so this is what you guys do? You get healed up and you study how to kill monsters? And he says, yeah, pretty much. She then inquires as to training, and he scoffs at that, saying, no, we're not training. But there's a reason why Ciri wants to train. She says how she wants to kill the man with the black-winged helmet. And Geralt looks at her and says, this is very important. We don't kill for the sake of killing. They kill to save lives. He then hears a commotion outside, and when he goes in the dining area, there's a party going on. And it's not just a party. I mean, there's hookers, there's beer flowing, and it's something that Geralt is disgusted by. He walks up to Vesemir saying, "What the hell is this?" And Vesemir explains that Eskel brought these women up here. And everyone's so drunk, they're probably not going to remember why they're there. But Geralt definitely does not approve. He walks up to Eskel and says, "Look, you can do whatever you want outside of here, but in here, you'll have respect for this place." Eskel, who is still in extreme pain, tries to challenge Geralt, tough talk him a bit, even attack him, but it doesn't go well. Geralt is able to avoid any conflict and just tells Eskel, "Go to bed." But Eskel doesn't go to bed. He goes in a separate room and tries to have sex with one of those prostitutes, but the sting from the Leshy ends up opening up, and a root starts popping out of this dude's back. A short while later, everybody hears a big bang going on, and all of the Witchers jump into action. They know that there's a problem. And it's Geralt who ends up coming across Eskel, although at first he doesn't know that it's Eskel. But when it comes time to kill the Leshy, that's when he sees that it's actually his friend, and he can't bring himself to do it. Eskel, however, can bring himself to attack Geralt. He ends up tying him up with his roots and even cutting Geralt quite a bit, and Geralt is only saved when Vesemir comes in and throws an axe right at Eskel's back. It distracts Eskel enough, but Eskel now turns his attention to Vesemir, and he ends up choking him out. And it's at that point that Geralt knows the only way to save his mentor is to kill Eskel. So he ends up turning his blade into fire and plunging it through Eskel's heart, killing him. This is disappointing because they didn't want to lose another Witcher, but it's also surprising because they've never seen a Leshy take over a human body before. But there's a first time for everything. All of the Witchers have a ceremony hanging Eskel's medallion with the rest of the fallen Witchers, and Geralt goes, checks on Ciri, but then he takes her outside and he starts training her. In episode 3, Ciri's training is going great. She is a quick study. She's really taking to this becoming a Witcher thing, but the other Witchers aren't really taking to her. They kind of blame her for the death of Eskel, even though it wasn't her fault at all. But she's been training so much that Geralt wants her to slow down, although she repeats something that Sir Laszlo told her. Less than perfect means death. He sends her, though, to rest up. She needs it. He then heads down to the basement where Vesemir is doing an autopsy on Eskel. He can't figure out how this happened. He's running test after test to try to find any hint of how this happened, how a human mutated into a Leshy, but he's not finding it. Geralt finally convinces Vesemir to take Eskel's body and put it in the cave with the wolves, which is their ceremony when someone dies. When they return to Kaer Morhen, they don't really see anybody there, and that includes Ciri, who at this point was supposed to be tending to the horses, but she clearly isn't. Eventually, a Witcher does come through and interrupt a conversation between Geralt and Vesemir and says, "Geralt, you need to see this." Because out of frustration, one of the Witchers, named Lambert, decided to take Ciri to what looks like a primitive American Ninja Warrior course and really test her merit. In reality, they brought her there to break her. At first, it looks like she's going to break, but she keeps going. She's bleeding, she's battered, she's bruised, but she's fighting on. And when Geralt finally shows up, she's at one of the last stages of this obstacle course. But when it comes time to stick the landing, she fails. Geralt walks up to her and says, "So close." And then he escorts her back into Kaer Morhen. He has to explain to her that when Witchers get beat up, it's easier for them to recuperate. She doesn't have that luxury. They get into an argument about how much she's training, where eventually she storms out of the room. Geralt looks around and he sees something poking out of the wall, and when he grabs it, he's noticed that she's tucked away her cloak from Cintra. He waits a little bit and walks up, interrupting a training session, of course, and he asks her, "That strange feeling that you get, like someone's coming after you. Describe it to me." And she says, "It's like I'm being pulled towards something." He asks her, if you were to follow that feeling, where would it take you? And she thinks about it, and the vision she gets is in the forest. So that's exactly where they go. As they're walking towards this feeling she gets, she asks Geralt, "Why me?" And he tells her that he was at her parents' wedding, and he saw her mother exhibit uncontrolled magical power. He thinks that she has that. They continue to walk, and eventually they come across the Leshy without a hand. It's the same Leshy that Eskel killed, or so he thought. It starts to attack them, but mainly going after Ciri, until the Leshy is killed by a bigger monster that Geralt does not recognize, he's never seen before. And that's when he tells Ciri, "Run." She does. She runs right to the face of a cliff, hiding, until eventually that monster kind of corners her. Now, luckily, Geralt jumps off this cliff, stabbing it and cutting its head off. He then takes the head back to Kaer Morhen. Now, over with Francesca and Frangilla, they've overtaken Cintra. They've made it a safe haven for elves. Francesca is still following the prophet she heard in the hut. She believes that this is the right move. Although Phil Evangel is concerned because he's heard word that the North has completely turned against them. He knows that that's bad news. They could be in danger. But Francesca just doesn't believe it because that wasn't what she was told in the hut. Frangilla followed Francesca to Cintra. But some of the Nilfgaard soldiers aren't fond of following Frangilla. Francesca actually interrupts a conversation between Frangilla and a frustrated Nilfgaardian soldier, and she pulls Frangilla into a separate room, and they talk about the visions they've had. Francesca tells her that in the cabin, she was told by somebody masquerading as Ithilien to come to Cintra in order to find Dol Plathana. Frangilla tells her that she was told by someone masquerading as Emir to bring Francesca there to fight against the people that have wronged them. So they both know that they've probably been played, but they also know that they probably should work together. Frangilla tells Francesca, the Deathless Mother may have brought us together, but you can trust me. Francesca's fine with that, but she does tell Frangilla, I want a home for my people, and I want a place for our future to begin. And that's when she shows Frangilla that she is indeed about 6 months pregnant. Now, the elves and Nilfgaard overtaking Cintra is a big deal, especially in Aretuza. The council gets together, and they start talking about what they should do. They even call Istrid in to make a statement. After all, he wasn't a Nilfgaardian dig site, but he tells them he found no indication of their plan of attack. But the council is completely split. There are the people that are saying, we told you so, and then there are the people that are saying, we couldn't have known. Vilgefortz tells the group that the Northern Kings are coming for Memorial, and they're going to need answers. And Tissaia brings up the fact that the Nilfgaardian prisoner they have hasn't given them anything because there's a magical barrier in his head. Everybody kind of looks at Istrid for some insight on this, but he tells them, I wasn't there to study Nilfgaard. I was there to study monoliths, which, by the way, they hold the history of this continent, but I also think they hold our future as well. Everybody then gets into an argument about the elves heading to Cintra and if they're an enemy or not. Someone like Stregaborn believes that they are, in fact, dangerous. Tissaia, however, completely disagrees. Stregaborn says, if we don't control this, we're going to be bearing a lot more than 14 mages. And that's when you hear someone say 13, because Yennefer has returned to Aretuza. Tissaia is so relieved to see Yennefer, because she was really broken up with the idea that Yennefer had passed away. Tissaia alone, she asks, what was going on in there? And Tissaia says, everything's pretty contentious right now. Artorius is stressed out because he can feel his leadership just slipping away. Stregobor is desperate, and that makes him dangerous. Tissaia then gets serious with her for a second, saying, your actions at Sodden Hill turn the tide, and so many of us know that you're the hero, but we need to let Vilgefortz carry the mantle of victory for now. Because of that, I need you to lay low. And Yennefer figures out that the reason she needs to lay low is because Tissaia and Vilgefortz are making a play for the seats of power. So she goes down to the pond where her friends were turned into eels, and she starts trying to conjure magic, but it's not working. She gets caught by a bunch of the other mages, including Marigold. She's thrilled to see them, they're thrilled to see her, and they start getting caught up. Marigold won't go for a soak, though, and when she gets Yennefer alone, she tells her that back in Sodden, she got burned up pretty good. She was screaming, and Yennefer walked right by her. And she's not mad at Yennefer. She actually thought at the time that if one of them gets to live, it should be Yennefer. But she didn't go to take a soak because she's pretty scarred up. Yennefer tells her that she'll talk to Tissaia about fixing it, but Marigold says no, don't worry about it. What's lost is lost. As those two were getting caught up downstairs, upstairs, Stregobor is trying to convince more people that elves are dangerous. He brings up an ancient story of somebody called Falca. And the description of Falca really fits the description of Yennefer. She was powerful, she was bitter, she was quarter elf, and eventually she slaughtered kings, queens, priests, common folk, everybody. This one mage killed a ton of people in Redania and Temeria. But this fear-mongering gets interrupted when Istrid walks in and says, Falca was trying to rightfully recover her throne. Stregobor says, you weren't there. They then start arguing about the similarities between Falca and Yennefer. And Stregobor does have some credibility because he was actually there. He tells the group, if we allow Tissaia and Vilgefortz to take charge of our council, we're going to allow our power to be diluted by elven blood. Istrid, however, says Yennefer would never do what Falca did. And Stregobor says King Vrydank was pretty sure of his sweet daughter Falca too, and look how that turned out. Now back downstairs with Yen, she's trying to keep a low profile. She runs into Vilgefortz, and he does say, I wish things could be different. I wish you didn't have to lay low, and I apologize for that. She keeps walking, and she walks into Kahar's cell. She starts kind of mocking the fact that he's locked up. Yennefer starts to walk away, and he yells, "Frangilla told me about you. When you guys were schoolmates, she envied you. Back then, that is." Yennefer quickly walks away, and she walks right into the hands of Stregobor. He just got finished up with his Yennefer smear campaign, and he uses his powers to trap her in her own mind, trying to find out where she was, because he finds it very suspicious that she used fire magic and then was missing for a month behind enemy lines. So he wants to get to the bottom of it, but she basically tells him to piss off. So he ends up using the same strategy that Tissaia used on Kaer. And while it didn't work on Kaer, it does work on Yennefer. He ends up seeing exactly where she was, who she was with, but he ends up getting stopped when Tissaia ends up catching him and using magic of her own to make him stop. She ends up bringing him in front of the council and telling them what he did, saying he committed treason. He, however, pleads his case, making Yennefer out to be this monster who has ulterior motives to take Aretuza down. So the council decides that to prove her innocence, she's going to have to kill Kaer. Yennefer hates this idea because while the council thinks it's going to prove that she's not a spy, it's going to prove that she is indeed a killer. Tissaia says, "Tell them the truth then, that you're not a threat because you've lost your magic." She yells at Tissaia, "I've tried everything. Tell me how to save myself." And Tissaia says, I can't help you. Yennefer feels like she is nothing without magic, but Tissaia thinks she's being ridiculous. Because when she had power, that wasn't good enough and she wasn't happy. That night, she tries to sneak out, but she ends up getting caught by Istredd. Istred's not going to rat her out. He actually tells her that he lied to the council. He heard Nilfgaardian soldiers, and he's planning on leaving for Cintra the next day to help elves who are migrating there. She, however, blames Istredd for putting her in this situation where she's going to have to kill Kaer to prove her innocence. She tries to walk away, but Istredd grabs her and says Stregobor has spies stationed in towers outside. They're going to end up catching you. He then walks away, and she starts hearing the voice from the cabin saying, "All you lost, all you deserve, come to me." When she snaps out of it, she decides not to leave. The next day, her, Kaer, the council, they all head to go have a memorial in front of the Northern Kings. This includes King Foltest and also King Vizimir of Redania. When they arrive, Arturus thanks the Northern Kingdoms for putting up a monument for the fallen mages. Vilgefortz tells them that they're going to cut Kahar's head off and send it to Cintra to show that they mean business. He then hands over the axe to Yennefer, and she starts hearing the voice again, saying, "Simply say the words." She walks over to Kaer with the axe, but when it comes time to cut his head off, she doesn't. She cuts the shackles off, and they both take off running. It takes everybody by surprise, and as she's trying to escape, she runs into Kaer. She tells him, "Get on the horse." He asks, "Why are you saving me?" She says, "Don't be stupid. I'm saving me." And they take off. In episode 4, the closest city they can get to is Redania. And just like Francesca had correctly predicted, elves are not being treated right in Redania at all. They're being treated like second-class citizens. Arrested, chained up. And the Redanian king, Vizimir, couldn't really care less about the elves. He's greeted by a couple of people who are would-be assassins, but they're thwarted by his advisor, Dijkstra. As Dijkstra is cleaning up the mess, he lets him know that the Northern Kingdoms have formed an alliance because of their hatred of elves, but Redania shouldn't care about that, because the elves are all headed to Cintra. Now before, you never would think about attacking Cintra. Now, with just the elves there, it's kind of ripe for the picking. Dijkstra then looks in the owl that's sitting in the room, and he tells Vizimir, "Leave us to decide how to do this." Vizimir gets drunk and starts talking to this owl, and maybe the owl's talking back? I don't know. But they both decide that they need to get as much information about what's going on in Cintra as possible. The way to do that is to put in a spy. The spy, though, needs to be malleable and distrustful in all the right ways. And the elf that they decide to be a spy is Dara. Now, back on the street, Redania is not a great place to be, even if you're only quarter elf. Yennefer and Kaer are trying to keep a low profile. At this point, Kaer knows that Yennefer doesn't have any more magical powers. But it's not like he's in great shape either. So at the moment, their whole mission is to get back to Cintra. And when he says this, Yennefer mentions to him how the Nilfgaardians are working with the elves. And that's pretty surprising. She tells him it's funny how quickly people forget about you when you're no longer of use to them. As they're looking for a way to get to Cintra, a bunch of pamphlets fall out of the sky, and they're wanted posters for both Yennefer and Kaer. So now they know they need to lay low. At night, they almost end up getting caught, but they end up going down in the sewers. meeting a couple of elves who are at first pretty skeptical, but eventually come around because of the fact that they're wanted by the same people. Enemy of an enemy is my friend type of situation. The two elves tell both Yennefer and Kaer about someone called the Sandpiper, who is ushering elves out of Redania into Cintra, and that's the person he defined. But as they're heading through the sewer system, they're attacked by some monster. It's probably as big as a New York City rat. One of the elves ends up dying, and Yennefer almost ends up dying. She's saved by Kaer. When they finally get out of the sewer, Yennefer is completely stressed out. She's ranting and raving, and Kaer, to make her feel better, tells her that she was incredible that day at Sodden with the fire. But then he realizes that the fire is what took away her magical ability. He tells her, perhaps there's a bigger plan out there for you now. She cuts him off and says, you can stop about the whole speech about the white flame. Frangilla already gave it. He shoots back, Frangilla is dedicated to the cause, but she points out that the most important thing that they teach the mages in Aretuza isn't magic, it's to make people in power believe anything they want them to believe. She yells, Frangilla is trained by the best, and Kaer yells, yes, I've met your best. She tried to pierce my brain and extract every thought that I've ever had. And you know what? It didn't work. Frangilla and I serve Amir because he served us first. They then stop arguing because they see some of the elves sneaking into a bar, and they figure that that's probably where they're going to meet the Sandpiper. When they get in there, they find out, yeah, that's exactly what it is. One of the elves who's also waiting to get safe passage tells them that the Sandpiper is somebody who performs there every night. And that's when Yennefer recognizes the voice because the Sandpiper is the bard. When the performance ends, Yennefer goes up, and the bard is thrilled to see her. She's thrilled to see the bard. They get caught up pretty quickly. She asks him, why are you helping us? And he explains that he was at the Great Oak when it was raided. And this is a place where every freethinker was welcome, but then all of a sudden, they started taking people that they didn't like. He figures before too long, they'll find an excuse to take him as well. So he's going to fight back and do what he can. He then agrees to help her and Kaer get to Cintra. That night, he tries to sneak onto a boat, and he's caught by a harborman who wants his papers. He starts singing, and the harborman recognizes his song, so he's about to let him on. But when the harborman criticizes one of his tunes, the bard can't let that go. The bard starts getting into it with this harborman, and now the harborman wants his papers. It looks like none of the elves are going to end up getting on this ship, and that's when an older elf, who was one that Yennefer and Kaer met in the sewers, ends up sacrificing himself, distracting the harborman by getting his ass kicked, which allows all of the elves to get on the ship. Now that they're tucked away, the bard says goodbye to Yennefer and heads up. But shortly after he leaves, Yennefer hears him scream, and when she goes up to see what's going on, she doesn't see the bard, but what she does see is his guitar all smashed up. Now, back at Kaer Morhen, the training continues with Ciri and Geralt, but during one such training session in the woods, Ciri comes across a woman who she's very skeptical of. The woman asks if she's coming from Kaer Morhen, but Ciri is reluctant to say anything. Geralt, though, ends up interrupting the conversation, and that's when Ciri realizes that Geralt knows this woman, and the woman is Marigold, who, it's worth mentioning, was not at the ceremony that Yennefer escaped from. When they go back to Kaer Morhen, Ciri realizes that pretty much everybody at Kaer Morhen knows who Marigold is, because everyone's thrilled to see her. That night, over dinner, Geralt tells Ciri that Marigold was brought there to help her, guide her in a way. Just like what Mousak did for her mother, that's now Marigold's job, for her. That night, Geralt fills Marigold in exactly who Ciri is, and also about the fact that Ciri won't tell him anything of what happened before the fall of Cintra. Marigold says, if her mother did have powers as you say, then Ciri could have inherited an evolved version of it. But this is all untested. Marigold then asks when Ciri started exhibiting some signs of chaos, and Geralt says, that's the thing, she hasn't, at least not the typical indicators. What she seems to have, though, are visions. She might have the power of foresight. He then tells Marigold about how Ciri felt a pull towards the Leshy that ended up turning Eskel. He takes Marigold over to the lab and shows her the head of the monster that he's never seen before. Marigold decides to do a test to see if a mage had created it, but that test is going to take some time. The next morning, when Marigold and the rest of the Witchers are having breakfast, Ciri comes out, but she looks completely different. She looks like she kind of dolled herself up a little bit to look like Marigold. Marigold tells her that she wants to work with her that day in the lab to kind of try to get to know each other a little bit. But when Lambert walks in, he starts making fun of how Ciri looks. And these comments make Ciri feel so bad that she takes off. She runs right by Geralt, who's walking in, and asks, what happened? And Lambert plays it off like it's nothing, but Marigold yells, you guys should be ashamed of yourselves. She starts listing all the ways about how they don't treat this poor girl right. And it definitely gives everybody a second thought. Later in the day, Geralt ends up walking in the lab where Ciri and Marigold are ready to see if the monster was indeed created by a mage. But what they get is something from a monolith. It's something that Marigold has never seen before. When they crack open one of the limbs from Eskel, it's the same thing, which means they came from the same place. But two monsters coming from a monolith doesn't make a ton of sense. Geralt and Marigold are trying to make sense of it, but that's when Geralt realizes that Ciri is being way too quiet. He looks at her and says, "What do you know about this?" She explains that when Nilfgaard attacked Cintra, right outside the city walls, she saw a monolith topple. Before she can even answer on how this happened, she gets a calling, saying, "Daughter of Chaos belongs to us. Turn your backs, join the procession. There's only death here," and then she passes out. When she wakes up, she finishes the story. She tells both of them that when the Black Knight captured her, she was scared. She ended up screaming, and that's when the monolith cracked and fell. So she is the one who toppled the monolith. She starts blaming herself for these monsters, but Geralt tells her, "It's fine, I'll fix this." The next day, Geralt decided he needs to go to Cintra. So Marigold portals Geralt into Cintra to talk to Istrid, who studies monoliths. As Geralt heads to Cintra, Vesemir takes a walk. But on the walk through the woods, he notices something weird. There are blue flowers growing from where Ciri had bled. He brings the flowers to Marigold and says, "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me this isn't Faneweed." And the reason why he's so shocked to see this is because this flower only grows where elder blood has been spilled. And this flower is growing everywhere that Ciri bled. Now the thing about elder blood is, it was wiped away from the continents generations ago. Vesemir tells Triss that there are legends that elder blood was used in the creation of the first Witcher mutagens. Mutagens that were destroyed in the sacking of Kaer Morhen. Ever since that happened, there hasn't been a Witcher created since. But it looks like destiny may have given Witchers a gift, because Ciri could be the key to making new Witchers. In episode 5, right after Geralt portals to Cintra to meet with Istrid, well, first of all, he scares the crap out of Istrid, but then when he starts talking about monsters coming out of monoliths, Istrid doesn't really believe him. He thinks that a prank is being played on him, but that's when Geralt pulls out the head of the monster and throws it down and says, "Are you going to help me or not?" So the two head off to go see the monolith that was toppled. They walk all the way until finally they find the big crack. Istrid says it takes generations of erosion to even make a dent in the stellacite, and the stellacite is what was found in both monsters that connected them to the monolith. Istrid is floored. He thinks it's a scientific revelation and it changes everything. Geralt says, "I have to go down there." He wants to look for monsters, and Istrid wants to go down there because he wants to look for scientific purposes. But when they get down there, there's no evidence that any monsters have been there at all. There's just a bunch of cracked stellacite. Istrid, speaking aloud, is trying to figure out how this happened. He tells Geralt that historians have always theorized that monoliths are scars from the conjunction. But monsters didn't exist on this planet before the conjunction. All species up until that point were separated on different spheres, until those spheres merged into one. Now, a conjunction like that would have required two things: a massive surge of energy and conduits to channel it. Previously, everybody thought that the monoliths were simply points of impact, but Istrid hypothesizes, what if they're not points of impact? What if they're the conduits? Geralt, though, thinks that he's crazy. They continue to walk to try to find a way out of the crack. And with Geralt away, Ciri will play. She continues to... Marigold, however, hasn't brought up the elephant in the room. And Vesemir walks up and says, "Are we going to talk about the fact that a Cintran princess has elder blood?" And Marigold tells him, "We don't actually know that elder blood can make Witcher mutagen." Vesemir, though, does not believe this is a coincidence. And Marigold has to point out that Ciri is a living, breathing girl, not just some tool that he can use. When Ciri finally comes in for training and she's resting and having some dinner, that's when Vesemir approaches her and says, "I need to show you something." He gives a quick backstory on why the world needs Witchers and where they came from, and how when Kaer Morhen was destroyed, so was the mutagen that allowed them to make new Witchers. He then explains the flower and how she's connected with this whole thing. He tells her, "With a vial of your blood, we could protect generations to come." Ciri tells Vesemir, "I'll do it on one condition. I'm the first person that you use the mutagen on." And he immediately says no. He goes on to explain how, yes, Witchers now, they're warriors, but back when they were injected with the mutagen, they were scared boys, and some of them didn't make it because the mutagen is just too powerful. he can't take the chance with her because she's Geralt's kid. She yells at him, I care about you guys, and you said it yourself, Witchers are dying. And if you guys die off, then all of those boys who suffered would be for nothing. And Ciri is actually able to convince Vesemir to say yes. So they draw out the blood. Triss turns it into the mutagen. It works. But when Ciri says, I just needed a moment to prepare, Marigold asks Vesemir for what? And when she finds out that Ciri is planning on being patient zero, she storms into Ciri's chambers and tries to convince her not to do this. Ciri seems pretty dead set, and Marigold asks, why do you want this so badly? And Ciri explains that everybody in the world was taken for her before she could find the truth, so she wants to forge her own path. Marigold tells her maybe there's another way to find out where your powers came from. Ciri agrees, and what Triss does is a mage's version of Ancestry.com. They go into Ciri's soul, and they're transported into a bar, where everybody in the bar is somebody from Ciri's life. Witchers, Dara, even Kahar is there, and so is Ciri's mother. But when they see Ciri's mother, she acknowledges them, and that's something that's not supposed to happen. It actually freaks Marigold out a little bit, and that's when everybody in the bar starts acknowledging Ciri. They're not supposed to be able to see her. The bar then transforms into a doorway, and both Ciri and Marigold walk through it. They walk down a cavern, and then they open up another door where they see Ciri's mother and father shortly after Ciri was born. Ciri's father is stressed out. He tells Ciri's mother they'd kill her if they knew. But she points out it's a prophecy. Maybe it's not true. And he says it doesn't matter if it's true. It only matters that people believe it. Ciri then realizes this is from the night that they died. But just like back in the bar, Ciri's mother looks up at her, and Marigold realizes that Ciri's mother knows she's in the room. So she tells Ciri, we gotta go. When she walks out of the room, she hears that voice calling for her. It's the same voice that Yennefer talks to, the same voice that has been talking to Ciri this entire time, and that voice says, what are you, child? As Ciri looks down on some of those flowers that grow from elder blood, the hallway that they're in transforms into an open field, and that voice continues to call to Ciri. When they walk into the open field, they see Ciri's mother, badly injured and holding a crying baby Ciri. She starts telling the baby a story about an elven warrior that was made to kill human invaders. But the story is Nivellen's story. Triss, realizing that the woman is in pain, goes over to try to heal her. And that's when Ciri's mother jumps up and chokes Marigold. Her eyes roll in the back of her head, and Ciri's mother starts talking with the same voice that speaks to Ciri and Yennefer, saying, you cannot help us. Child of elder blood, child of wrath, the time of contempt is nigh. The world will die amidst frost and be reborn in the new sun, reborn of elder blood, of the seed that has been sown, a seed that won't sprout but will burst into flame. The sky then gets red, she starts seeing horsemen coming out of it, and the whole time Marigold is screaming for Ciri to help her. But all Ciri does is yell the name Geralt. And even from Ciri's soul, by her screaming Geralt, it ends up shaking real life. Like the tree with all the Witcher's medallions. But Geralt is still in the crack with Istrid. Istrid's still trying to make sense of this revelation that he's had about the monoliths. He pulls out his record and shows Geralt that a while back, he was at a dig and a monolith started having this strange vibration. And he's able to confirm through his records that it was the same night that Cintra fell. He feels like that can't be a coincidence. That would mean that that huge crack where they're standing is where the energy surge started. That activated the conduit system, and the monoliths started kind of talking to each other. Previously, they thought that these different spheres merged, and that was it. Istrid tells Geralt they didn't. They merged, and then they separated again. So when this energy surge happened, spheres collided once again, and the monsters that Geralt's encountering aren't new, they're just new to that world. Geralt then hears somebody scream his name. Istrid hears it as well, and Geralt knows that it's Ciri. Before he can even do anything, the stellacite that's laying there ends up lifting off the ground and shooting forward. When it looks like it's safe, Geralt and Istrid stand up, but all that stellacite created a new monster. It doesn't attack them, it just flies off. But Istrid had some serious questions. At this point, Geralt knows that he needs to get back to Kaer Morhen, so he has Istrid portal him out of there. And both Ciri and Marigold have returned, kind of. I mean, they never really left, but Triss is not doing well. She's terrified, looking at Ciri and says, something is ending, and it's because of you. The seed that bursts into flames, it's you. You're going to destroy us all. I saw it. Ciri ends up running out of the room, finding Vesemir and saying, all right, we're doing it. Inject me with the mutagen. But both Ciri and Vesemir end up getting caught by Geralt. Geralt chastises Vesemir. Ciri tries to stick up for him, saying this was my idea. She begs him to reconsider, and he ends up giving her some fatherly advice to just move on. He then tells her to go get her things, and it appears that they're leaving Kaer Morhen. While Istredd portaled Geralt back to Kaer Morhen, Istredd portaled himself back to Cintra. He's still trying to make sense of everything, and he goes to his records and is looking at the royal lineage, but it stops at Queen Fiona. Nobody knows where she came from. And then finally, over with Yennefer. When she goes up top, she doesn't see the bard, but she can't leave her friend behind, so she hops off the ship. Kaer, meanwhile, stays on it. He's headed for Cintra. And the bard was kidnapped by a mage named Rience, who was in a Cintra prison for 10 years because he had been able to harness fire magic. Another mage named Lydia comes up to him, talking about a way that he can get free. She tells Rience about Ciri, and that the White Flame is hunting her. But when others learn of her, they'll hunt too, and they must get to her first. He's not really interested in working with Nilfgaard, but Lydia tells him, I'm not working for Nilfgaard. So he ends up agreeing to go to work, kidnaps the bard, and tries to extract as much information as he can as to the whereabouts of Geralt and thus Ciri. The bard tells him, man, I make stories up. Geralt doesn't talk a lot. He's not one for chatter. Rience, however, doesn't believe that's all the information he knows, so he continues to torture him. Yennefer knows she needs to find out where the bard went, so she ends up hiring a local prostitute to try to help her out. A little while later, the prostitute comes back, but bad news, she couldn't find anyone by the bard's name. She does, however, say, if he goes to any taverns, you should probably check there. And that's where Yennefer finds him. She stumbles in, acting like she's drunk, and Rience has no time for her. He throws her up against a wall, sparks a flame, but Yennefer ends up spitting alcohol right into his face, which ends up putting a fireball into his face and burning him pretty good. It allows her and the bard to escape. When they get to an area they think is safe, the bard lets her know that Rience is after Geralt. He begs her to let him know, conjure a portal, but she says, I can't. The conversation gets interrupted by a couple of people in the street, and it forces Yennefer and the bard to run away. They split up, and Yennefer is saved by the prostitute, or so she thinks. When she goes in the prostitute's house, she ends up getting rounded up by the police because the prostitute recognized the wanted poster and couldn't deny that paycheck. Now it's the bard's turn to try to free Yennefer. But as Yennefer is being held in chains, she can hear that old woman from the hut talking to her. She tells Yennefer, you know what you need. You need your magic. You know the words. Say them. And Yennefer recites the exact thing that was on the altar from the ruins. She goes back to that hut, back with the old woman. Yennefer tells the woman that she deserves access to chaos, and the woman tells Yennefer, I know how you can get it, or I know how you can steal it. Then all of a sudden, the old woman turns into Ciri. This imposter that looks a lot like Ciri tells Yennefer, I'm the key to you getting your power back. All you have to do is deliver me to a shattered black door just outside Cintra. And finally, speaking of Cintra, Kaer arrives, but things have changed. No one knows who the hell he is. He's extremely frustrated by that. He's also very surprised to see Frangilla in charge, running things with Francesca, and that relationship is going great. Dara, by the way, has also arrived and checked in. In episode 6, things continue to go well in Cintra. The relationship between Francesca and Frangilla is great. But Francesca has noticed something different about Frangilla since Kaer showed up. And Frangilla admits that it might have something to do with the fact that Kaer used to be above her. Francesca tells her, now you need to show him that you are above him. Frangilla says, the White Flame rules Nilfgaard. And Francesca tells her that might be true, but the face that my people see every day, the face that welcomes new people in from the cold, is you. Kaer then rides up, and he's back in his full regalia. He tells her that he understands she made a tough decision to align herself with the elves, and that's fine. But there's a mission at hand here, and they need to get back to it. Ciri. When Francesca returns to the castle, Filavangelo comes in and gives her an update on building elven warriors. He then tells Francesca that something is feeling off with him ever since Kaer arrived. He feels more vulnerable. And that includes Frangilla. Francesca, already having the conversation with Frangilla, says, I'm taking care of it. Filavangelo then tells her that at first, yes, he was skeptical of this relationship with Frangilla, but it's worked out. So he's there to do whatever Francesca wants him to do. She says, the thing I need you to do right now is just be by my side because she is very pregnant. He then goes outside to do a training session with some elves, including Dara. But Kaer shows up and wants to show everybody who's really the warrior. He starts doing a, quote, demonstration with Dara, and when Dara kind of holds up to the test, Kaer kicks him down. Kaer then insults the elves and Filavangelo puts a knife at his throat, but He doesn't slit it because he gets word that the baby is arriving early. He looks at Kaer and says, "You're lucky." And then he heads up to tend to Francesca. And after what appears to be a pretty damn easy labor, I'm guessing Francesca didn't get an epidural, she delivers a baby girl, the first full elven baby to be born in decades. Frangilla leaves Francesca and Philevangel to be with their child, and then she heads out to overlook Cintra. But she's joined by Kaer. She asks Kaer, "Have you ever seen people this joyous?" And he says, "Yes, once, after the usurper was overthrown and the people rose up." Kaer then pulls out a letter, and it's from the White Flame. Frangilla nervously asks, "When is he going to be here?" And Kaer says, "Any day now." She then hears the voice from the old woman in the hut tell her, "First they'll take your power, and then they'll take your freedom." A few doorways down, Kaer is reporting everything he's heard back to the owl. He's finally figured out what they're after, and he can't believe that it's Ciri. Now, one person not in Cintra is Istredd. Istredd is still trying to make sense of everything, so he goes to a law firm of all places. The law firm of Codringer and Fenn. But these aren't just normal lawyers. They know everything, it seems like. He asks them, what does a witcher, a monolith, and a mysterious girl have to do with Nilfgaard? And Fenn tells him the girl is Princess Cirilla of Cintra. They then start diving into the records to try to find out more information. And Fenn does not think it's a coincidence that Amir wants the princess with the secret power to shatter the monoliths for her claim to a throne that he already took by force. Istredd points out that there's a gene that keeps showing up in Cintran chronological records that he's never heard of. Codringer grabs a scroll, and Fenn reads it, and it tells of a story that when the elves were threatened by humans, they built a weapon to destroy them. But Fenn realizes there's a mistranslation here, that the elves didn't actually build a weapon, they built a warrior. And that's when Codringer has an epiphany and says, Lara Dorn. Lara Dorn is a legendary figure that had a baby but died in childbirth and said with her last breath, "Know this, my curse will hound your descendants until the 10th generation, until the columns of time and space tremble and open for my people. Then my vengeance will be born again." Lara Dorn was that elf that Ciri and Marigold saw when they went into Ciri's soul. Codringer thinks this is ridiculous, that Calanthe would hide her elven bloodline because she knew what lurked in it. But Istredd says, yeah, because what hid in it was a generational weapon. And then finally, over with Ciri, they do end up leaving Kaer Morhen. Vesemir is disappointed in himself for how he acted, pushing them away. Marigold, however, walks in and tells Vesemir, "We've been fooled. Whatever is running through that girl's veins and whatever we made from it, aka the mutagen, it's more dangerous than we know." Vesemir's medallion then starts shaking, and he drops to the floor saying somebody's here, but he's incapacitated. And that's when Rias shows up. Rias attacks Vesemir. He wasn't expecting Marigold to be there, though, and Marigold does end up coming to his defense, but Vesemir is pretty banged up. Triss ends up patching up Vesemir, but when she walks out and sees the other Witchers, they're kind of blaming Triss for this because, after all, it was a mage who did this to their mentor. But Triss says, "This wasn't one of my guys. Honestly, I don't even think Vesemir is what he was after." And one of them makes a comment that at least Rias had left empty-handed, and that's when Triss realizes Rias didn't leave empty-handed. He left with the mutagen. Triss waits for Vesemir to be healed up. She tells him about the missing mutagen, but says, "I also have to go." She portals and sees Tissaia, and tells Tissaia, "I'm telling you this because I trust you. I know for a fact that a drop of that girl's blood could destroy the world." And what terrifies Triss is she knows there's a lot more than a drop in the hands of this mysterious fire mage. Rias goes and meets with Lydia and shows her the mutagen, and she wants it, but he says that wasn't part of our arrangement at all. Now that he has a little bit of leverage, he says, "Maybe we can rearrange this deal. I want to meet your employer." She tells him that her lord is a private guy, and then asks, why do you even want to meet him? And Rias tells her that he seems like a guy with vision, and he would like to help him see that vision through. She promises to see what she can do, and then they start talking about how to get Ciri. And as I said, both Geralt and Ciri had left Kaer Morhen, and Geralt and Ciri are headed to a temple school. It's actually a school that Geralt went to when he was a young boy, about Ciri's age. It's also a place where there's no fighting, there's no politics, they accept everybody, so you don't have to worry about watching your back. But on the journey there, they are attacked by that monster that flew out of the crack. Just like the previous monsters, this one was attracted to Ciri, but Geralt is able to kill it. Unfortunately, his horse Roach ends up dying in the process. Just before they arrive at the temple, she tells Geralt that she got the sense this monster didn't actually want to hurt her. She then tells Geralt about killing the 4 people when she screamed. She clearly feels guilty. For Geralt, though, that's rookie numbers. You gotta bump those numbers up. When they get into the temple, they meet the headmaster, a woman named Yennefer. She meets with Ciri one-on-one and talks to her about controlling Ciri's chaos. She then has one of the top students, a kid named Yare, who's studying to be a historian, show Ciri around. And Yennefer has a private conversation with Geralt about how screwed Geralt truly is. Yennefer tells him kingdoms are going to want her on her status alone. Nilfgaard already does. And if she has elder blood, Geralt, she's a tinderbox. Yennefer then asks Geralt, did she really recite Ithilne's prophecy in one of her episodes? And Geralt says she did, but I'm not going to let folklore dictate my path. Yennefer tells him that Ciri is a child of destiny. There are forces at play that are bigger than both of them combined. And the relationship between Geralt and Ciri just isn't enough. What you need to do is find what is missing in that girl, and then maybe you stand a chance of helping her. Ciri, meanwhile, walks around with Yare, who is clearly not around females a lot. He is completely nervous. And she comes across this floating metal ball attached to a chain. It's called the orbiculum. Ciri has no idea how to use it, so she's got to get to work practicing with it, trying to figure out what it does. And as Ciri was taking a quasi-tour of the temple, Geralt ended up going to the room that they're staying in. But when the door opens up behind him, he is shocked because it's not Ciri who walks through that door, it's Yennefer. They're both shocked to see each other, they both kiss, but they're also both caught by Ciri. Geralt introduced the two, and Ciri has, of course, heard of Yennefer before. Yennefer, on the other hand, of course, has heard of Ciri because Ciri's the one she's looking for. The three then go share a meal where Ciri tells Yennefer, Geralt says you're the most powerful mage he's ever met, and Yennefer's pretty flattered by that. Yennefer asks Geralt why he's there, and he kind of deflects. He then tells her, I met one of your friends, and he told me about Aretuza. Is that why you're here, hiding from the Brotherhood? And she says, yeah, it is. Ciri then tells both of them, I'm going to head off to bed. But right before she does, she looks at Yennefer and says, I've dreamed of you before we even met. And Yennefer tells Ciri, dreams are powerful omens. Geralt and Yennefer then roam the halls getting caught up, apologizing for their past, but then they get to present day stuff. Yennefer tells Geralt, I saw Jaskier. He was being attacked by a mage who could control fire, and the mage was looking for you. And that's when Geralt realizes this guy wasn't looking for me, he was looking for Ciri. But Geralt has noticed that Yennefer's heart has been racing ever since she came back. He asks her, why are you really here? And Yennefer tells him, I've just got some wounds that need healing. Now, Ciri tried to sleep, but she couldn't. She ended up going out in the halls and seeing Yennefer. They start talking a little bit, and then Ciri starts cursing the fact that nobody in her previous life told her who she was until Geralt showed up. Yennefer chalks it up to, maybe these people had a reason for it. Maybe they were trying to protect you. Ciri, your true power resides in more than your blood. With the right guidance, you may have the ability to break the cycle of hatred that runs in your family. She then leaves Ciri alone, and Ciri continues to roam the halls until Ciri comes across a book that's laying on the ground. She opens it. She happens to flip right to Ithilne's prophecy. She recognizes the words in it, but before she can really process it, she notices that her hand is covered in blood, and there's a blood trail on the ground. When she follows the blood trail, she finds poor Yara beat to crap. As she's telling Yara she's going to go get help, that's when Rias, along with 3 other guys, end up popping out of the hallway to take her. Ciri is able to hold them off long enough for both Geralt and Yennefer to show up and save her. Geralt tells Yennefer, take her, make sure she's safe. And Yennefer and Ciri go lock themselves in a room. Now the problem with the room is there's no exit. They're completely stuck. And Rias is outside of it, using his firepower to try to literally burn the door off. Geralt is tasked with taking out his 3 goons, which he does in epic fashion. But as both women are trying to figure out a way out, Yennefer looks down at the orbiculum and realizes that it's changed colors. She tells Ciri, this thing senses magic and it's not mine, so it must be yours. She then gives Ciri the words that are needed to cast a portal. And that portal opens up just in the nick of time. Some of the door is completely burned through. And Rias would have been able to get through if it wasn't for Geralt throwing a sword at him. It forced Rias to portal out of there. But as Geralt goes to grab Ciri, he looks through the door and sees Ciri walk through the portal. And he tells Yennefer, please, don't do this. But she does it anyway. And they both portal to God knows where. We'll start off episode 7 with Rias. He meets up with Lydia, and Lydia's not too happy because he doesn't have Ciri. And he's not too happy because he was told that he was going to meet with Lydia's boss, but he hasn't shown up yet. He gives Lydia the mutagen and says, "Here, look into this and I guarantee your boss will show up about 10 seconds later." So she does, and she opens it up. But it completely burns her face. And now Rias just has to wait and see if he was right, if her boss does in fact show up. So things aren't going great for Lydia. Things are also not going great for Frangilla in Cintra. She's completely stressed out with the White Flame showing up, and to make matters worse, the Nilfgaardian soldiers aren't really following any of her orders. They just don't respect her. Now, a large point of contention is the fact the elves did not show up for training that day. Frangilla tries to defend them, saying they were up last night partying pretty hard about the birth, but the Nilfgaardians, including Kaer, don't think that's a good enough excuse. So Frangilla tells Kaer, "I will handle it." So she goes and has a conversation with both Filavandrel and Francesca about why the men didn't show up. And Filavandrel apologizes at first, but eventually he admits, "We're just not into this anymore, this whole deal that we made. Seems like we have a bigger purpose now with the birth of this child. We're not really into fighting a Nilfgaardian war that isn't ours." But Frangilla points out, it is your war because this is what you signed up for. She tries to talk to Francesca alone, saying that the bond they struck in the hut is working. Francesca has her baby, Frangilla has the approval of the White Flame, and all of this will stay that way if they're a unified front. However, Francesca looks at her and says, "We're friends, I value that, but right now, family is way more important." So it's going to be a no for Francesca, and Frangilla needs to figure out her next move. Over in Frangilla's old home, Aretuza, they have a new leader of the Brotherhood. It's Vilgefortz. They also have a guest, Dijkstra. He's visiting from Redania, and he's letting him know about the birth of the elven child. Most of the Brotherhood feel like this is an issue, and Tissaia points out, only you guys could think that a baby being born is a threat. Now, Tissaia doesn't think that this meeting was just about letting the Brotherhood know about the birth. She feels like Dijkstra is fishing for some information, and he says that it's his job to have information. Like, for example, he heard that Marigold is back in Aretuza, and that's news to everybody. It forces Tissaia to admit, yes, she came back, she wasn't feeling well, she's healing up. Dijkstra then heads back to Redania, and he tells Vizimir, all we have to do is track down Ciri. With Ciri, we have Cintra, which means that Redania is the most powerful kingdom in the continent. Now, while Dijkstra was returning to Redania, Tissaia tried to get some information from Marigold. She started off the conversation by letting her know she actually saw Ciri and Geralt after the Battle of Sodden, although she didn't realize who they were at the time. They were looking for Yennefer. She then asked Marigold, who else knows about the information you told me? And Marigold says, just the Witchers and you. I don't trust anybody else. But that's when Vilgefortz runs in and demands that Marigold tell him all the information about Ciri. And Marigold feels completely betrayed. She looks at Tess and says, you told him? And Tess has to explain, I had to tell somebody, I didn't tell him everything, but this is important information people need to know. Marigold, however, does not tell Vilgefortz anything because she feels like she was stabbed in the back. She just walks off. And Tissaia is pretty pissed off that Vilgefortz ran in there. She tried telling Vilgefortz she's not ready, but he clearly didn't listen. Vilgefortz tells Tissaia, I couldn't wait. We need to get our hands on this girl. If we do, we could end war forever. But her, in the wrong hands, well, that's trouble, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves if that happens. This culminates in a pretty big screaming match. It's out of earshot of Arturus, because he's just chilling in his room doing some work when he is visited by Frangilla. She's doing this covertly. She tells Arturus everything that's going on with the baby, but his big takeaway is the fact that Tissaia was right. This baby being born actually helps the Brotherhood because the elves don't want to fight a Nilfgaardian war. She, however, came there looking for some help, but he doesn't give it. He gives her a whole speech about knowing her place, how she's not a leader. And this pisses her off so much that when she portals back into Cintra, she portals into the dining hall where Kaer and his men are actually talking about when the White Flame shows up, he's probably going to end up killing Frangilla. Well, that pisses her off. So she decides to show them who's boss. She puts them in a paralyzed state. They can look around, they can hear, but they can't move at all. And one by one, she kills all of Kahar's men. As she's doing so, she's getting encouragement from the Deathless Mother, who was the voice from the hut. She finally gets to Kaer, but she doesn't kill him. She tells him that when the White Flame shows up, he's going to tell the White Flame that these men were traitors, and she was justified in doing what she did. The murder of those men wasn't the only murder that went down that night. As Francesca is sleeping, she has a horrible dream that her baby is being killed. But when she wakes up, she's shocked to learn that it wasn't a dream. Filavandrel is holding their dead child, and they're floored. So that is what is going on inside of Cintra. But outside of Cintra, the rightful heir to the Cintran throne, Ciri, portal with Yennefer to the cabin of the woman that took Ciri in. Takes a little bit, but Ciri ends up recognizing it, although the family isn't there. Ciri starts looking around the cabin, and then she finds out the family was murdered. Ciri immediately starts feeling guilty for this, feeling like it was her fault. And then she thinks about Geralt, and this is when Yennefer sees her opportunity to get Ciri to Cintra. She tells Ciri that mage probably did kidnap Geralt, but they're not going to kill him. They're just going to torture him to try to get information on Ciri. So she convinces Ciri to follow her to Cintra, all the while knowing Geralt isn't there. On the way there, they come across a river that they can't cross because the bridge is down, and Yennefer feels like this is a good opportunity to do lesson 2 of Ciri's magical ability. She starts giving Ciri the words to conjure a new bridge, and it starts to work, but it gets too much. Ciri starts bleeding out of the eyes, bleeding out of the nose, and Yennefer screams for her to stop because she's just going to end up hurting herself. Ciri is frustrated and yells, and when she does that, it actually teleports both of them over on the other side of the river. Yennefer, though, isn't mad at all. She's actually thrilled, and she tells Ciri, "Don't ever apologize for having this kind of power." They then continue to make their way towards Cintra. Geralt was back in the temple. When Yennefer betrayed him, he knew that he needed to get to Ciri immediately. Nenneke, however, tries to talk him out of it, saying maybe Yennefer doesn't have ulterior motives. Maybe she's trying to protect Ciri. But he reminds her, "I made a promise. This is my duty to protect this girl. I need you to portal me somewhere." And where he has Nenneke portal him, it's to the prison where the bard is being held. He's able to free the bard, and the bard gives him a huge hug. He's thrilled to see Geralt. But he's even more pumped because now that he's free, he can bathe. He smells terrible. As he's washing up, Geralt asks him, why was Yennefer around? What was her angle? And Jaskier says she was on the run and she had lost her magic. And the fact that Yennefer had lost her magic is complete news to Geralt. But the more that Jaskier thinks about it, he thinks that he was duped by Yennefer because he says, well, she told me she lost her magic, but then all of a sudden when I went to go free her, she said a couple of words and she disappeared. So I think I was lied to. Geralt asks him, what did she say to make herself disappear? And when the bard tells him, Geralt recognizes the phrase. Geralt realizes Yennefer is working with the Deathless Mother, whose real name, by the way, is Volithmir. The first Witchers were actually hired to trap Volithmir, and they did that. They trapped her in the hut. And while neither Jaskier or Geralt want to admit it, they both realize that it's very plausible that Yennefer is about to take Ciri and sacrifice her to the Deathless Mother so she can get her power back. So Geralt tells the bard, we need to get to Cintra immediately, but they're going to need help. And luckily for Geralt, they run into Yarpen and the other dwarf warriors. Geralt tells Yarpen he needs his help, and that sounds a lot better than protecting caravans. So Geralt, the bard, Yarpen, his men, they all head to Cintra, unknowingly on a collision course with Yennefer and Ciri. And Yennefer and Ciri are the first ones to arrive. They're within eyeshot of the kingdom, and Ciri tells Yennefer about how she toppled the monolith. And Yennefer is fully understanding just how powerful this girl is. Yennefer tells Ciri, promise me that if we're ever separated, you'll remember you have that power inside you. Ciri says, I want to trust you on that, but I've never been able to control my chaos, and no one's ever been able to teach me how to control it. The Deathless Mother, though, is getting a little impatient. She starts talking to Yennefer to speed this process up, finish the job, deliver her to the door. So Yennefer reluctantly does it, delivering Ciri to the door, but it allows both Ciri and Yennefer to telepathically speak. Yennefer tells Ciri, if you're afraid, turn back. Ciri, realizing what just happened, tells her, you know that door was not supposed to be opened up, right? Yennefer says, yes, I am aware. And Ciri can't believe that even though Yennefer knew this, she still led her to the door. The door then disappears and they're able to talk just like normal people, and Yennefer starts apologizing, telling her how she felt like she had no choice, she had to do this to get her power back. Ciri can only focus, though, on Geralt. So she starts walking towards Cintra, and Yennefer has to tell Ciri, Geralt's not there. He never was. This was all planned just to get you here. But you need to come with me now. Because it's at this moment that Yennefer realizes she's made a crucial mistake. Ciri, however, looks at Yennefer and says, I don't trust you. And when she says that, the ground forms another crack. That crack goes so far, it actually goes all the way to the castle walls, and it alerts the Nilfgaardian soldiers. Ciri and Yennefer try to get out of there and run away, but they're scooped up. They're only saved when Geralt, the bard, and the dwarves all show up and save the day. Geralt is holding a sword at Yennefer's throat, and he tells Ciri, go with the bard, you're going back to Kaer Morhen. Ciri asks him, where are you going? And he tells her, I have to slay a monster. He doesn't kill Yennefer. He instead uses her, having her say the words that get them back into that cabin. But when they go to visit the Deathless Mother, it's not like before, because now that the door's opened up, the Deathless Mother can escape, and she does that. She ends up escaping into the real world, tracking down Ciri and taking over her body. And in the season finale, Rias was right. The boss showed up about, I don't know if it was 10 seconds, but he showed up, and Rias gives him the plan on how they can get Ciri. But Ciri is the least of the elves' concerns. Dara ends up going to Filavandrel and Francesca and admitting that he was a spy, but he told Redania he's done, he's out. And Redania seems to be suspect number one on who killed the baby. The killing of her child was the last straw for Francesca. She's out for vengeance. She tells Filavandrel, gather some horses. We're leaving. And that night, they sneak out. Possibly one of the reasons they were able to get out of Cintra so easily is the fact that most of Cintra is preparing for the White Flame's return. But when Frangilla gets word of what Francesca did, she goes and grabs Kaer and lets him know that the elves left. They know why they left. It's to get vengeance for the death of their child. And while both Frangilla and Kaer know that it's probably Redania, Kaer has the idea to use this to their advantage with the White Flame and tell the White Flame that it was actually them who killed the baby elf. Kaer says to Frangilla, think about it. The baby gave them hope, so you had it killed. And now they're out there slaughtering the enemies of our kingdom. This makes a whole lot of sense to Frangilla, and they're both in agreement. When the White Flame shows up, they're straight up lying to this guy. Now, Francesca, along with the rest of the other elves, did sneak out of Cintra, and they did go to Redania. And they are trying to get payback. Francesca is walking down the street and scarring every single baby with an elven symbol. Even Francesca's brother doesn't really agree with this method, but they understand that she's in extreme pain, so they just allow it to go down. They then go back to the woods, hunker down, planning their next move. As they're discussing what to do, a couple of elf guards end up catching Istrid, who is lurking about. Istrid explains who he is, but all they care about is the fact that he's human. He starts talking about Ciri, but most of the information he's giving them is stuff that they already know. Filavandrel gives the order to get rid of him, and that's when Istrid yells, she's Henna Kaer, and Francesca says, stop. She has Istrid repeat it. And Henna Kaer means that she has elder blood in her, which means that Ciri is one of them. Even though she doesn't look it, she is. Istrid tells them, I've never seen anything like her power. And Francesca realizes that Ciri is the one that Itheline prophesied about. Ciri could save all of them. But the entire conversation was being listened to by Dijkstra's owl, whose real name is Philippa. And straight Harry Potter style, she turns into a human. She fills Dijkstra in about the entire conversation, and Dijkstra tells her, bring me the bard. It's about time he paid back his benefactor. But the one person we haven't talked about is Ciri, who is clearly possessed. Geralt, realizing what's going on, rides as hard as he can back to Kaer Morhen. When both him and Yennefer arrive, Yennefer is trying to apologize for everything that went down, saying that she couldn't bring herself to actually sacrifice the girl. Geralt, though, doesn't really want to listen to it. All he cares about is getting to Ciri. And Ciri has made her way through the castle, slowly killing witchers in their sleep. She's about to kill Vesemir, and that's when Geralt walks in and unknowingly saves his life. Ciri starts blaming all the murders on an old woman in a black robe. Immediately, Yennefer says it's got to be Volethmir. They ask Ciri, where is she now? And Ciri says, I saw her leaving one of the rooms. We have to do something. Something about the story isn't matching up. Geralt says, well, how did you survive? And Ciri tells him, I screamed. And he asks, that didn't cause any damage? That didn't even wake up Vesemir? Geralt realizes that she's lying. She is Volethmir. And when he asks Volethmir, what do you want? Volethmir, through Ciri, attacks him and runs off. The remaining witchers all armor up. But before they go hunt down Ciri, Geralt finds Vesemir and says, your fight is not with Ciri. Vesemir says, when you took Eskel down, it broke me, but I realized that it was the right thing to do. This is the same situation. She's done too much damage. Geralt reminds him, don't forget, you thought she was strong enough to be the next Witcher. She can survive this. I'll be able to convince Volethmir to leave Ciri's body. Once the demon's out, we'll trap her. Vesemir agrees to give it a shot, and everybody goes looking for Ciri. But Yennefer realizes that she needs to fix things. She grabs Jaskier and says, come on, we gotta create a potion. She then hands Jaskier a jasper and says, it turns wrongs into rights. Geralt will know, but I need you to get it to him. Jaskier then takes off to track down Geralt. And Geralt is able to find Ciri, at least her physical form. The actual Ciri is trapped in her mind. Volethmir has put her back before all of this mess, back in Cintra, back with her family. So she's having a great time. She's not planning on leaving. Shortly after Geralt shows up, the rest of the Witchers do as well. Geralt tries to bargain with Volethmir, but his offer of sacrificing himself for Ciri isn't accepted. Ciri then screams, breaking the tree with the Witcher's medallions and revealing a monolith that Ciri screams at and breaks. All the stellacite ends up flying at the Witchers, killing some, but others, like Geralt, were able to create a force field to save themselves. But the portal, however, opens up and monsters come out of it, monsters that the Witchers have never seen. So now they need to defend themselves. As most of the Witchers go about doing that, Geralt stays, trying to convince the real Ciri to fight back. The physical Ciri, controlled by the Deathless Mother, starts attacking Geralt. While all of the fighting is going on, Jaskier is trying to yell at Geralt about the Jasper, but Geralt isn't paying attention. Now, Vesemir has, at this point, had enough. Kaer Morhen is being destroyed, so he goes after Ciri, but he gets stopped by Geralt. Geralt isn't done trying to fight back. This fighting goes on, with Geralt actually having to fight off a monster of his own. That frees up Vesemir to stab Ciri, trying to end all of this, but it doesn't work. The Deathless Mother conjures a spell to heal herself. So, the Witchers have tried basically everything. How about an intervention? At this point, what could it hurt, right? They start telling Ciri how much they love her, how much they care about her, trying to get the real Ciri out of there, to fight back. It's not working, however. The real Ciri is at that ballroom, and her parents have just arrived. The Deathless Mother is pulling every emotional heartstring possible to keep Ciri in there. Geralt now realizes that Ciri can't escape. The Deathless Mother needs a vessel, so Yennefer slits her wrists and offers herself up. It works. Ciri says goodbye to her parents, and the real Ciri returns. Deathless Mother goes into Yennefer. When Ciri comes to, Geralt tells her, if you can conjure these portals and attract monsters out of them, you can send one back again, and that's what we need you to do. We need you to send Yennefer back. So Ciri tries that, but unfortunately, Yennefer's not the only one that goes back. Ciri and Geralt go with her. And they end up going back to the Wraths of Morg. It's a sphere where something called the Wild Hunt went down. The good thing is for Yennefer, when they arrived at the Wraths of Morg, the Deathless Mother left her body. The bad thing is, there are these fire skeleton soldiers coming right at them. I should say, coming right at Ciri. Ciri grabs both Yennefer and Geralt's hand and portals back to Kaer Morhen. When they get back, Geralt tells Ciri, we are safe now, thanks to you, and that's all that matters. Geralt then goes up to Vesemir and says, Ciri and I can't stay. We need to keep moving. Vesemir starts to apologize for everything he did, but Geralt says, don't. It's not your fault. We're leaving because she's marked for something, and it doesn't end with the demon or the wild hunt. If mages and royals find out she's still alive, they won't stop coming for her. And unfortunately for Geralt, he's unaware, but it's too late. Tissaia got a good look at Ciri, so she goes to the Brotherhood and gives them a rundown description of what she looks like. They know also what Vesemir's up to. They know that if Vesemir ends up getting Ciri, he's going to end up controlling all of them. Queen Maeve brings up the point, life was a lot better when everybody thought Ciri was dead. So Tissaia gives the order. There's a bounty on Ciri's head, but also a bounty on anyone who helps her as well. When Yennefer went back through the portal, she felt something in her body. So when she returns, she decides to see if her powers are back. And in fact, they are. The magic has returned. Geralt then walks up to her and tells her, I need you to use your knowledge of magic to train the girl. You're the only person who's helped her control her powers. They then go outside and talk to Ciri. Geralt tells Ciri, I think I know what Volethmir wanted from you. Volethmir's been here since the conjunction. We always assumed she was from another sphere. Now those monoliths that you shatter, the ones that pull new species of monster through every time you scream, those could be gateways to other spheres. Ciri cuts him off and says, my scream woke Volethmir. That's why she wanted me? And Geralt says, yeah, she wanted to go home. You were the key to her future. But the thing I can't figure out is when did Nilfgaard realize that you were the key to theirs as well? Nilfgaard knew before anyone else. How does Nilfgaard know the truth about you, Ciri? And that is because the White Flame, Emperor Ramir, is actually Ciri's father. Ciri has no idea he's alive. And he returns to Cintra, where both Frangilla and Cahar lie to him, telling him that it was their idea to kill the baby. He cuts him off and says, no, it wasn't, because it was mine. I gave the order. He then has them arrested. He explains that having that baby killed was the best path to helping him find his daughter. And that is the end of Season 2 of The Witcher. Thank you so much for watching this recap or listening to it. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you leave a comment, I don't get back to you. Don't take it personal. I try to avoid the comment section at all costs, especially with things like The Witcher, because if you get one name wrong, someone's in there telling you how much you suck because you mispronounced the name Philavandrel. Bear with me, folks. I'm learning here. I also have merch, though. Go buy a t-shirt or something. Just know, if you reach this point, I truly, truly appreciate it.